you just knew he was going to be out at nighttime establishments every night of the week, and a lot of times making stupid decisions. And so that team really liked the player. And so they invested in, I think it was like a 3-person security detail. So somebody was with him 24 hours a day.
So starting with the basics, like what does a scout do?
So there's 2 tracks inside of the category NFL scout. So the track that most people think of is what we would typically call a college area scout. So you are the person out on the road, managing yourself, going from school to school, looking at draft eligible prospects. So you're mapping out your calendar, usually out 11 to 14 days at a time, go home for 2 or 3, and you're responsible for certain states in a geographical region. So you might be the Southeast Scout. So you've got to hit all the schools in Georgia and all the schools in Florida. The other track is called a Pro Scout. So we were responsible for all the people that were no longer college eligible. So we would watch every player currently playing in the NFL every year. Part of it was for advanced scouting opponents, right? Preparing our coaching staff for what they should expect to see that get next week. Part of it was for things like free agency. Part of it was for trades, players that get cut that you may want to claim or sign, roster management in season, whatever players you start the season with week 1. You're not going to have all those healthy bodies by the end of the year. So you're going to need to continue to have people in the pipeline. And that was our job. We were day-to-day roster management, putting out fires, trying to keep enough healthy players in the locker room so coach could practice.
What usually separates somebody from doing one versus doing the other?
I think people over time kind of fall into a specialty, but early on you start in what they typically call a scouting assistant. It's a kind of a glorified intern position. Could be a 1 or a 2-year deal depending on the team. And then after that, if you've been doing well and they're interested in retaining you full time, it's really whatever opens up. Pro happens to be a faster track to director because there's less people in that chain of command, whereas college is about twice the size.
Is this a job like most people kind of think of a job?
Yeah, there's no 9 to 5 to it. People in it typically think of it as a lifestyle more than a job. People that come from military backgrounds say the season kind of feels like being on tour in terms of being away from your family. And that time during the season, from when training camp starts in July through whenever your season ends, you're kind of in it. And those hours are long and exhausting. And then it moves a little more to a 9 to 5 when you get towards the springtime, in the summer, certainly.
So when we talk about scouting, like it's one of those things like, okay, I get it, but I don't actually know what you're doing. What are you looking for, I guess?
You're trying to predict another human being's future. Because ultimately, we don't care about what they've done. We care about what they're going to do. So you are watching players play for another team. So we're coming up on the NFL draft, right? And all these names are being tossed around. These young men have played for 1, 2, 3 universities over the last handful of years. We don't really care how well he plays for LSU. We care about whether or not that means he's going to play well for the New England Patriots. And so you're watching a human being playing this game for another organization, and you have to try to isolate their performance in the context of all the other moving pieces around them and figure out how much of their performance is created on their own, how much of it carries over to us, what kind of gaps are there that we have to fill, and who is this human being as from a character standpoint, more so than just an athlete, and how does that carry into our organization? All of that so that we can say, this person coming in here will perform at this level within this period of time and is worth this amount of resources, whether that be draft picks or money from a contract standpoint. So it's a big prognostication game. We're trying to have a crystal ball and predict the future.
I don't know very much about football or sports in general necessarily, but to kind of like crystallize this in my mind, it sounds like it would be really difficult to tell, like, okay, a running back. Is he good because he's a good running back, or is he good because the coach, or is he good because he's got a really good offensive lineman? Is that really hard to figure out, like, okay, they're good, but why are they good? And would they be good for us if we don't have that thing that they have now?
Absolutely. I got to give a shout out to one of my college professors, Todd Cross at University of Massachusetts. He had us read this article from a sociologist, and the sociologist was studying swimmers. And in there's just this line that I've never been able to let go of, and it was, how did the plant grow before the flower bloomed? And so whenever we watch the player, right? So you're talking about that running back who's performing. That's the flower in bloom, right? It's out there. We can all see it. It's on display. The question is, what happened before we got to watch it bloom? So is this somebody that came up in a cultivated garden with fertilizer and water and plenty of sunlight, proper temperatures? Or is this like something coming up in the cracks of a sidewalk who's been mistreated but still performing? So we have to then go in and say, okay, this guy performed well. Did they perform on top of what was created for them? Right? Is there a surplus value that they create, or are they only getting what's done for them? And that would change how much we value the player. Could still be a competent player either way, but one guy's probably worth more than other because he adds value on top of what's being created by the structure of the teammates, as opposed to only getting what's created by the structure of the teammates.
If you had to put a percentage on it, what percent of people would you say they would be good no matter where they go?
I think the bulk are situationally dependent. That could be based on scheme. That could be based on teammates, the type of coaching that they'll respond to, places that will play to their strengths. Very few, I would say probably in the 10 to 15% would be team agnostic, where they could truly go anywhere because their athletic profile, their mental aptitude profile, their character and how they approach things profile, their health profile, all of it's completely agnostic to the situation around them. It's a very small percentage. Most guys have pluses and minuses, and then you have to find the right home to manage those pluses and minuses.
That 10 to 15%, is that really obvious? Like, oh yeah, that guy.
Yeah, I think there's a strong number within that that's very obvious. Like the players that are going to be at the top of the draft. I mean, you watch 3 clips of them on YouTube and you go, wow, that's pretty special. I can see the unique gifts, that person brings to the table. There are some guys later on where maybe the athletic traits aren't as obvious, but their anticipation, their instincts, how they approach things in terms of they're taking care of their bodies, how they approach learning their own scheme, their opponents, what have you, where all of those things would pan out. And again, they may not be the top award, the all pro in the league, but they're going to be a very good player, someone that you can win with for years. Pretty much anywhere they're going to find, a 4, 5, 6, 7 year career. Again, they may not be a household name by the end of it, but I think they'll have sticking power.
But when you scout somebody, like, are you just looking at their performance on the field, or is there more to it than that?
Everything. I mean, everything you can get your hands on. I tell people, imagine you are in charge of whatever organization you're currently in, right? And you have to staff every single role. What would you want to know about the people, right? You'd want to know about how they approach their work and how well they can get that done, how quickly they can get that done, how much they still have to learn about that job. You'd care about how they're going to treat other people, how they're going to treat the chain of command, how they're going to treat subordinates, right? How they're going to treat customers. We don't tend to get into like sleep patterns of employees like you would with an NFL scout. Like we're going to care about how he takes care of his body outside of it because that's really that's the tool that they're using. But like if you were working in a machinist shop, you'd care about how that person takes care of their tools, right? Because their tools are their livelihood. Well, in this case, the body is the livelihood. So we're going to care about how they take care of their body, but we care about how they're going to take care of their mind, right? And how they're going to approach things. You try to gather everything you can. The challenge is determining the weight, right? The gathering of it is something I think a lot of people can do. Like, what would I want to know about a person? I want to talk to people around them. I want to talk to their former coaches, their former teammates. I might want to talk to their parents. I might want to talk to their high school English teacher, right? They try to get a sense of who they are, and we have that ability in our industry. But then how much do you weigh it, right? If those sources are starting to give you different stories, which source do you rely on? Which source is telling you what they want you to know versus which source is telling you what you need to know? The kid's parents have a vested interest in his success. So do his college coaches, whose resume is going to be built in part on how well these players are selected in something like the draft.
Whose like opinion would you generally weigh the most? Like when you would talk to people, who would you kind of like, oh, I'm probably going to get a good assessment from this person?
I don't think it's going to be a title in every building. All right. Some buildings, it's the administrative assistant, and that man or woman's been there for 10, 15, 20 years, and they've seen all the comers and goers, right? And they're not attached to one coach or the other, they're attached to the organization. And so they'll tell you, like, that guy was not good in this building. He treated people poorly. He might be a good player, but he was bad to us. Some places it's the equipment manager, right? Some places it's going to be the academic liaison. Some places it's going to be a position coach. Some places it's going to be the manager of the local watering hole, who can tell you if they came in on practice nights and were doing stupid things and treating the staff poorly or things of that nature. Like, you're going to go anywhere and you're going to find, and unfortunately, it's not going to be like the first time you go to a city to investigate a play. You're probably not going to get the perfect glimpse into it then. But as you go back to these cities year after year and you talk to these people year after year, you build those relationships, you'll start to figure out the people that shoot you straight and those that just kind of run the company line.
Do the players know that scouts are going to be in there talking to like the assistant equipment manager or like the bouncer at the bar at the college bar? Like, do the players know that scouts are going to do that and kind of?
Most college programs will tell their players, like, someone's always watching.
As we're leading up to the draft, what is it like for scouts right now?
This is actually slowing down just a little bit because the information gathering process on the vast majority of prospects is complete. Right now, if you're still gathering information, it's usually like your security team is doing full background checks and looking for arrests and looking for outstanding warrants or any of that kind of stuff. They might be bringing that in. Your medical team's doing some final checks on players who maybe had late season injuries and hope, trying to get them to your city so your doctors can take a look at them. But for the scouts, we've kind of put the hay in the barn, so to speak. And the last set of meetings will be wrapping up here shortly, where you've got the whole staff together and had the conversations about each prospect and decided where they're going to sit on the board. You've talked strategy about how you would like to see the draft go and how you think the draft will go. And then, like I said, you kind of take a breath and then get ready for the week of, because then for the decision makers, it all fires up again, right? And you can start trading picks and moving around the draft, and it actually unfolds, right? So you move from the prognostication of what you think might happen to the reality of what actually happens. I can think of one a few years back. The night of the draft, somebody released a video of a top prospect wearing like a gas mask bong. And so this player was projected top 5, and all of a sudden the top 5 teams are like, we don't have any information on this. We don't know what this is. We don't know if this is an issue. Like, this is going to be an arrest issue. So like, he dropped, and all of a sudden he's down in the teens where no one was expecting. And so now teams that were picking 10 to 15 who thought this player's long since going to be gone are going, well, do we want him? Do we want to take this risk? And so there's things that can happen, again, up to the minutes and the seconds that you're on the clock, and you have a certain amount of time to make your selection, that can change. And so you're trying to stay on your toes and gather every relevant piece you can.
How much is kind of the scout listened to in the meetings? Are people like, okay, the scout says this, that is the word of whoever, right? Like, all right, we're going there. Or is the scout kind of like, oh, okay?
It has evolved when the departments were smaller and tape was physical. So when scouting first came around, it was still 35 millimeter reels of tape. Like, scouts would carry their projector from school to school. Finally, we're in a digital age. So the challenges before were that your scout might be the only person who saw that game at a given time in the calendar year, because he was the only person who could get to the school and physically see it. And so their voice was huge at that time. Now, with the film being digital, your general manager could watch that film an hour after the game ends. And it has lessened some of the impact that the scouts are going to have on the early prospects. Like, these young men who are going to be taken in the first 30 to 50 picks, they've probably had 8, 10, 12 different people evaluate them in the process and submit a grade and a report and the whole 9 yards. And so at that point, the scout's voice is not going to be above their boss and their boss's boss and their boss's boss and the owner who might have looked at him as well. As you move into the later stages of the draft, and certainly into the period after the draft, which is called undrafted free agency, now the scout carries a huge amount of weight because they be the actual only eyes on that player, or one of only 2 or 3 people who have seen that player. And so now they get to be more vocal. So the scouts really take the victory laps on the third day, day 3 of the draft. Success stories there, the scout usually takes and gets a lot of credit for, whereas the first night of the draft, again, there's been so many people in that process, the area scout may not get credit for that success.
Are there still times though where you would say that a scout really kind of finds the diamond in the rough, that like nobody saw this person coming, and this scout was the only one that saw them?
Absolutely. Usually it's getting to a prospect early enough that your organization can build conviction, because if you don't find the player until December or January, a big bulk of the work has been done. A big bulk of the board hasn't been set, but it has been tiered. And so a new player coming on may not move to the top of the stack, and kind of gets buried in the middle. Versus if that player is identified a little earlier, and you can get more and more people involved in the process earlier on, that player can have some staying power towards the top. So like there was an article that came out recently of a scout for the Kansas City Chiefs who works the West Coast. And he identified a defensive back at the University of Washington that he really liked, and stood on the table for him early and said, I really like this player. And so that got more and more powerful people to watch that player earlier on in the process. And the organization built a lot of conviction in that player, and that stayed throughout the process. He ended up being their first round pick and an all-pro player for him. And they still credit that scout for the early work, right? Overall, the organization made the selection, but he was the one standing strong early, saying, we really have to pay attention. Like, we can't just let this player kind of casually go through the process and pick up on them later. Like, this is someone we want to dig in now because I really think they're special.
Was that Sneed guy, or was that somebody else?
Trent McDuffie was his name. Sneed's teammate there.
He's are you ready for some harder / listener submitted questions?
Let's go.
Why do people get it wrong? Like, why do the scouts get it wrong?
It's usually not the athletic ability, right? We can measure those things. We can tell you he's 6'2". We can tell you he's got 9 5/8 inch hands. We can tell you he can run the short shuttle in 4.2 seconds. So those things are more objective, and we can tell you how they've produced, right? What they've accomplished. What's harder is the piece of taking them to the next world. Going from college to professional is a world jump. And one of my mentors, a guy by the name of Jerry Angelo, he has this line he likes to use. There are athletes playing professional football, and then there are professional football players. And so an athlete playing professional football may make it for a few years, right? And they'll have kind of that flash in the pan, that 2-3 year run where everybody knows their name and all of a sudden no one hears about them anymore. And then there are the J.J. Watts and Larry Fitzgeralds and Tom Brady's, who we know for 10, 15, 20 years, who are professional football players, where they dedicate themselves to this craft. They put tools in their belt, they take care of themselves, and distinguishing between those two camps is challenging, and human beings are variable, right? We're not static creatures. So I've seen examples of players who were kicked off their college team because of bad behavior, and college programs who are particularly tolerant of bad behavior. I've seen players get kicked off their college team and then be all pro performers who have 10, 12-year careers because the light kind of clicks and they go, you know what? I got to get out of this childish life that I've been living, and I've got to get serious about this. And then I've seen people who were serious college players all of a sudden have a bank account full of money in fun cities and kind of slide off the path, right? And all of a sudden they're more occupied with the glitz and the glamour than they are the profession, and they can figure it out for a few years, but then things catch up to them and they don't make it. So trying to assess how this human being is going to be 3, 4, 5 years down the road, when all we know is what they've done the last 3, 4, 5 years. Oh, by the way, these are ages 19, 20, 21, 22. I mean, how many of us were our best selves at 22 years old? And how much did that predict how we acted at 27, 28, right? Trying to figure that out is not something I think the human race has figured out, let alone this particular profession.
But can you see signs of that coming? in the sense that, like, look, this guy's not doing, so he's making bad decisions, but the foundation is there. Can you kind of see that in people? Or is that like, no, you can't see that at all?
I think you can see it in probably the majority of the prospects. Like there's the stable ones, like what they showed you before is what they show you after, whether that be good or bad. Then you can see those where you can see the exact situations that caused them to fail so far. You know, situations on the home front, lack of resources, death of people close to them, right? All those things that can really kind of throw you off kilter in your life for a short period of time. And you can say, okay, understanding why they failed will build systems to help them not do that. Like one team, there was a young man, just immature, not a bad human being, just really immature throughout his college time. And you just knew he was going to be out at nighttime establishments every night of the week and a lot of times making stupid decisions. And so that team really liked the player. And so they invested in, I think it was like a 3-person security detail. So somebody was with him 24 hours a day. Like they never left his side. And so they had a employee of the organization with this person 24 hours a day for like the first 2 or 3 years of their career, if I remember correctly, to help ensure that they didn't make some of those decisions. Like we know what causes you to fail. Let's build some infrastructure to help you not fail. Like those things are available to these owners who have very deep wallets, that can do those kind of things if they want to buy into that risk. And so I think sometimes there's high risk profiles and low risk profiles. A low risk profile doesn't mean a good player. It just might mean a good person. And so you have to figure out what kind of risk are you willing to take on in your organization? What can you tolerate? What can you manage? And what should you stay away from?
That player that you were talking about, though, that's got to be a really good player, though, right?
He was a first rounder. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not like the 5th round guy is not like, hey,
No,
man,
no.
too bad.
5th round guy, he gets a cup of coffee, and if he screws up, we're going to bounce him out of here and bring the next one in.
Hardest position to scout, easiest position to scout.
Quarterback's the hardest. If this profession had figured out how to evaluate quarterbacks, if anybody at home watching it, if any statistical analyst, if any mechanics guru, throwing coach had figured this out, where they could predict quarterback play, owners would throw them more money than they would know what to do with. They'd have a private island somewhere. And that doesn't exist. That hasn't happened. So nobody has figured out how to evaluate quarterbacks other than maybe Andy Reid. I will give Andy credit. I do think he's got a better beat on it than most. So it's absolutely the toughest. I've seen seasoned evaluators like the New York Jets a couple years ago. I've got a ton of respect for the general manager. They had the 2nd overall pick. They took a quarterback. It has failed spectacularly. They are on to the next and trying to figure it out on the fly. He's hit on many other positions on the roster. He did not do well with that particular selection, and it'll haunt you because it's an incredibly important one to the overall. So quarterback's absolutely the hardest. I think running back is probably the easiest because the things that we ask a running back to do in Pop Warner Little League football are very comparable to what we're going to ask them to do at the highest level. Like we run the same plays throughout that. It's not like the running game magically changes. The passing game does, but the running game has a lot of similarities throughout the levels. So they'll do things throughout their time, especially in college when we study them the most. They'll do a lot of things in college. It will see them do 1-to-1, apples to apples at the next level. So it's easier to project that. I think the athletic traits are easier to project. I think the ability to discern how they're going to deal with blocking and stuff like that all maps out a little easier. So I'd put running back up there.
Why is quarterback so hard?
The ability to, in your head, understand what it is you have around you, your own roster strengths and weaknesses, to understand the 2, if not 3 play calls that might have been given to you in the huddle, that time walking up to the line of scrimmage to look out at all of this and make a decision for which one of those plays makes the most sense, to stay with the play you're in and communicate that, or to change the play you're in and communicate that, simultaneously making other subtle adjustments to protections or receiver alignments or routes or what have you. And then after the ball is snapped in somewhere in the neighborhood between 2 and 3 seconds, to look at the picture the defense presents, which then changes, and compare that to what you're expecting your players to do, and then to be able to discern, does your player do the thing you expected him to do? Does the defense do what you expected him to do? Did everybody pick up the people who are most likely to attack you while these very large human beings want to come pummel you into the ground? And then to physically deliver an accurate pass to somebody in that time is just unbelievably challenging. The mental gymnastics often needed to manage that position, to have the ego to lead another group of people into that and to believe in yourself even when the results may not be there yet, to put in the work at all hours of the day, to take the beating, to stand there in the face of pressure, to again just understand what you're supposed to do and what they're trying to do and mesh all that together. It's just incredibly difficult. And then the physical part, right? The actually accurately throwing a football into these challenging spots in the field. It's just, there's so many parts.
Easier to scout a big school or a little school?
Oof. I think the big schools will give you some more apples to apples, and you'll see a player in a more finished state because they typically have a full, what they call training tables, basically just a food, access to good quality food and nutrition. So, I mean, there are programs that you might be getting some sort of soggy sandwich at the end of practice, and that's the best that they can offer you, right? And most players are hitting McDonald's on the way home for food. And then there's the places, the biggest schools, where you're going to a specialized cafeteria just for the athletes that have all these nutritious options, well prepared with the customized shake with whatever nutrients that they've taken out of some test that they've done on you of what you're lacking. Um, Places that have the full strength and development programs, people that are taking care of their bodies. So you'll see a player closer to their ceiling in those situations. Um, I think you can find competent coaching in either side of that, big schools and small schools. You can have good coaching. I think the quality of the teammates is obviously going to be higher. So if other people around you are doing their job well, it gives you a better opportunity to do your job well than when other people are failing at their jobs and you're trying to pick up the slack. On the flip side, being at a small school playing against players that most likely aren't going to play at the next level, you have the best opportunity to stand out, right? You're not going to look like you belong. You should look above that. When you watch a small school player, the rule of thumb is, I mean, you should stand out on 3 or 4 plays. And if I'm watching you, you're not standing out against that level of competition on a consistent basis. Why should I expect you to move up to the biggest stage and then stand up to those people and perform?
Biggest miss of your career?
I valued Derrick Henry incorrectly. So it's all on record. It's all out in the internet, where I had looked at the young man and he played behind this amazing offensive line, and he's a freight train. He's an absolute freight train, but subtle lateral movements are not his strong suit, and still aren't his strong suit. But he has been able to carve out those things that he does well, and the teams have been able to carve out those things. And so kudos to him. And so I allowed my own bias on the running back position. And so ultimately, all the things that I put into the equation, I ended up putting him more in the mid rounds, and he's obviously better than that in terms of his NFL performance. And so I would have missed out. Like if I had been running the show, the value that I put on him in the middle rounds, he wouldn't be there. He was a second round player, and he's performed as such. And so I missed on that.
But does every scout have a story like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about, we talk about gathering all those pieces, right? Um, and deciding what to place value on and how to build that final equation, right? It's not just saying I have all the pieces of the profile. It's saying, what is that profile worth? What does it all add up to? What is it all going to mean? And we all have places where we've let the wrong thing weigh too heavily on it. There's going to be people out there that talk about they let Russell Wilson's height really sabotage their grade. When you looked at his leadership and his accuracy and all the other things he did in college, they were at the top of the charts, but he was in the lowest possible percentile for height. And while that may not be the 10th most important thing to the position, he's an outlier. right? And people were afraid to bet on the outlier. One of my favorite stories is a general manager, still general manager for a club. He grew up in a city not where he's currently working. So when he'd go home every year to see his folks, he'd go to the local college. And so he went to do his yearly visit, and he fell for this player. Loved him, gave him a second round grade or whatever it was. He comes back for draft meetings, and his area scout, his college director, all of his lieutenants had looked at the same player, and they were like mid to late. And he's got the highest grade on the board. So they're at the meetings, and he's looking at all these grades, and he's the high man on the grading sheet. So let's put on the film. Let's figure this out. Now, a lot of general managers, because they don't want to be wrong, they'll start to strong arm everybody, right? I'm going to bring everybody's grades up to mine because I see him correctly and you all must be wrong. So they're watching the player and they're watching the player, and he keeps going to different games. Hey, go to this game, go to that game, trying to find things. And finally, after I think it's the story goes like 30, 40 plays, he goes, turn it off. I don't know if I didn't buy a cup of coffee or if I was in a bad mood, but like that guy can't play like I thought he could. Bring him down. You guys are right. I'm wrong. And so, and his staff loves him and adores him because he's willing to admit, like, I had a bad day. Like something about me watching that guy that day, I put the pieces together improperly. He's useful, just not at the level I had him at. Let's bring him down to a more reasonable value. And his scouts were very happy that he's willing to make that kind of determination.
How much does like marketability of a player go into it? Like, yeah, maybe this guy's not that great, but he's got lots of followers on social media. You know what I kind of mean in that sense?
Absolutely.
Like, how much does that, like, yeah, but they can get us a lot of attention. But
I think other sports have that a little bit worse than football. I think because football is as popular as it is across the country, both college and professional, a lot of these players are bringing a following, right? So most of them are marketable. Any of these quarterbacks that are being discussed right now, they're all going to bring a following. They're all marketable. I mean, there's a story a few years back of the Cleveland Browns selecting Johnny Manziel out of Texas A&M, who was a big celebrity that year before. Johnny Football, as his nickname was, and very entertaining player. And the story goes that the owner just said, like, we're taking him, and the scouts were not on board at that where they took him. They didn't want him that highly. You know, they'd rather him gone somewhere else because they didn't think he'd make it. And the owner's like, no, I want to sell tickets. Let's get the fan base excited that this player is going to change our organization. And they ended up taking him, and he was out of the league within a couple of years.
what round would you say is generally like that's the hardest round to get right? That's where people are really going to be scratching. Is it one of the earlier rounds because it kind of gets overwhelmed, or is it kind of towards the later? Like, what round would you say is the hardest round to scout for?
I think the easy answer is to say the late rounds because you're taking flyers, you're buying some traits, but you know you're not buying all of them, and you're hoping some of it sticks. But my answer is going to be the first round because I think there's so many forces on it. We just talked about the marketing. That's the biggest, but it's not irrelevant. Like your owner is going to be involved in your first round selection. Like you're going to have to convince your owner on why that matters because this industry comes with a 24/7 news cycle, right? Where people are going to nitpick everything you do, and that particular selection is going to get nitpicked above all else. And so you're letting not just how the player performs, but the positional value. Like some positions are just more valuable than others. And so the best player available to you may be a running back, but if you hold a top selection, you should probably be taking a quarterback or a pass rusher or offensive lineman or something like that that are more valuable. So do you take the more valuable position or do you take the better player? Right? How does that work into your team building? Because it's all about resource allocation. Right. And then there's the times where you look at it and say, I'm looking at these two players and I think I like one above the other by a little bit, but the player that I like is in a position group where there's 10 other guys that I like a little less, but I still like them versus the player of the two that I'm looking at that I like a little bit less early on is at a position where after him, I don't know what I'm going to get, if anything. And so now all of a sudden I'm taking a player that maybe I like a little bit less because the market that year isn't giving me other options. whereas the other
I
position
see.
might. And so you're trying to think through all these different strategies of not just that one selection, but of the 7, 8, 10 selections that you have. How do I maximize the value across all of them? And do I even do that this year? Do I get myself out of this draft class this year and punt to next year and acquire other resources for doing so, right? Allow somebody else to come up and use my selection and get other resources from them that I can use down the road. I think the first one's really, really hard.
So how does somebody become an NFL scout? I know that you run an academy for it, but how does somebody become an NFL scout?
Yeah, that was a decade ago. I started the Scouting Academy to answer that question because people were wanting to get in. People's interest in things around team building and the draft was bigger than it ever was. And I had worked for 3 different NFL clubs at that point in time, and nobody had a standardized training protocol. Nobody had a standardized selection process. There really wasn't a place to go and learn and develop in this before you were there. So it felt like a chicken and egg problem. Like teams wanted people that knew what to do, but the only place to learn what to do is with a team. And all these other industries have some mechanism, whether it be through apprenticeship or whether it be through a 4-year university and a degree track. Like you could go and learn about the industry before you had to do it. And the NFL scout was not one of them, right? You were in it and you had to decide if you liked it and could do it on the fly. I didn't enjoy being in those situations. So I put together something where folks can come and spend time learning. Do they like this? Are they good at this? Prior to having to go actually do it for real.
That does seem really difficult, right? In the sense that like there's not really any training and then you're kind of on your own
Yeah.
completely. Like we don't have any training, but go out on the road and we'll see you in 6 months.
I
Like
mean,
that's a
you might have
difficult thing.
someone that kind of takes you under their wing and mentors you, but it's not guaranteed. Like I was in places with great mentors, like Louis Riddick in Philly was amazing to me. I could be in his office all day long asking questions if I wanted to. And then I was in buildings where I got to see my boss like once a week for an hour, and I could bring questions during that time. And that's still great. I mean, it was still an opportunity to get my questions answered, but that was it. I got 1 hour once a week. And other than that, it better be pertinent to whatever I'm producing for them. But no other questions were going to be answered during that time. And so you could feel the disconnect in development. Like, I know I'm here. I know I'm producing. I know I'm not producing my best work, but you're also not helping me produce my best work. So I'm just going to keep trying to fake it till I make it versus being in a place where someone's like, hey, let me show you where you screwed up and how to not do that again.
Yeah, that would be really difficult. Is it a job that a lot of people, do people last long?
I look at it, I tell people about it, you got to jump off a cliff, right? Because it's not going to be on your terms, it's going to be on theirs. And so the people that are willing to jump off the cliff, yeah, they're lifers. They'll do it for as long as the teams will have them. And then the people that can't quite commit and they can see themselves being happy in so many other things, they should probably go do those other things because the pay is not going to be what you want, the hours aren't going to be what you want, and the family life's not going to be what you want. Very few people are going to know your name for a long time. And so you're going to have to be very comfortable that your work in building this team is something that can give you satisfaction without all those other things being there to give you satisfaction. And if you're okay with that, then you'll love it.
How much does an NFL scout make?
It depends. Cities, like how much it costs to live in cities, will impact it. Different ownership groups and how much they pay will impact it. Most guys are going to start somewhere in the $60,000-$70,000 range full time with benefits. Now, when you talk about that per hour, they're working almost twice the amount of hours as most people's weeks, so that pay scale changes a little bit from that perspective. And then, usually every 2 years you'll have a contract renewal, and that might come with a $2,000 bump. That might come with a $5,000 bump if they renew you at that point. And so after about a decade, you're probably making closer to 100K. For some teams, it might be 120, 140 before you get to director track, and then you could make 150 plus in some of those director track jobs.